Hello, flat earth researchers, debaters, and debunkers. We live in a world of belief. We are born into a culture, wherever that might be, or whoever our parents might be, and their beliefs are often impressed upon us. Of course, as we grow up, we sometimes learn to discern our own beliefs depending on our own knowledge and experience as we grow. And they may be in line with what our parents or our immediate cultural surroundings teach or preach us, or they might turn out to be very different and diverse. But all of us are on some kind of journey of discovery, and it's a very thrilling one indeed. And of course, each and every one of us has a unique path in life, and it is something driven by an unknown force. We get inspired, we often have thoughts, and we do things for all sorts of reasons. Most of all, though, they are often centered around some kind of belief. So ultimately, if we are on a journey of discovery and truth seeking, probably the ultimate goal in many ways is to be rid of those beliefs, or at least be aware of them and put them into some kind of context. We all enjoy ritual, whether it's the way we get up and brush our teeth, or the way we might pray, or whatever it might be on a daily basis. We are creatures of habit, just like any other creature on this earth. And so, a religion is a way of life. It's this, you do something religiously. It doesn't necessarily mean that you appeal to some deity or authority, but this word of religion is obviously connected to a way of life, a way of doing things, thoughts and actions which come about, and the way we conduct our lives. So, of course, we are all affected by our beliefs and the beliefs of those around us. And one of the biggest challenges in life is to, first of all, be aware of those beliefs and be aware of the differences and the diversity. And the awareness is one thing, but then what about the attachment to a different belief, or the emotions that might be invoked by thinking or experiencing something or someone with a different belief. This becomes a daily challenge, if not a moment by moment challenge, a consistent challenge in our daily lives, to be aware of how beliefs affect our thinking, and how our thoughts consequently affect our speech, our actions. This is just a logical process of going through life and experiencing it and trying to analyze what it's all about. And of course, this is the burning question that we all have from a young age, when we become aware really of the world that we find ourselves in, and we question the surroundings, and we question the authority that we are brought up to believe in. And often, it's funny, I was thinking of a dog getting tangled up in a leash or something, there would be a point where a dog might struggle and fight frantically of getting tangled up in a long rope or leash or whatever it is. And then there would be a point where the dog has this realization that they can't escape. They don't have the intelligence, perhaps, to untie or unravel the entanglement they've gotten themselves into. So then there is this point of acquiescence of the situation, acceptance and surrender, I suppose. And they would stop resisting, stop trying to fight the entanglement, because it either just makes things worse and there's just no end. Now, the dog might then kind of eventually calm down and eventually find a way to escape by chewing through it, or it would be maybe a long process, or hopefully a human would come along and unravel them, and everything would be okay again. The point I'm trying to make here with this analogy is that when we approach and ask these questions, we ultimately, the why, we ultimately reach a dead end. We can become very entangled ourselves in very restrictive beliefs, because no one really has any solid answers as to how and why we are all here in the first place. What are we all doing here? What's it all about? So this wanting to have answers to this question is a form of suffering. And when we realize that there are no real answers out there, there are no authorities that can give us the ultimate answer, then we might well just give up and acquiesce or surrender to our situation. But this can be both positive and negative. We could believe that we will never find an answer, and we can believe that there is nothing to be answered. It's all just an accident, and we would go with that. But then we would cling on to this newly formed belief, or perhaps one of the beliefs that is handed to us, or it has become part of a culture. Or we could carry on with this sense of surrender, but still explore without the attachment to any belief. So I think this is what the journey for many of us, or any one of us, is all about. Is there is that realization that no one has any solid answers as to the fundamental how, why, where, when. There are always ideas and beliefs and stories which we can listen to and take bits and pieces from, and maybe eventually realize that any particular religion, as I said earlier, can be just a way of life that one chooses to lead, and there is no right or wrong, because they are all there are so many infinite possibilities as to the way things could be. So originally I wanted to just very kind of have some succinct ways of describing the imagery we're presented with different religions. What I've been harping on about for the past few minutes is really akin to Buddhism, or perhaps Hinduism as well. Uh, we'll look at Buddhism first, and the symbology we see here. Uh, we have this wheel, the Dharma wheel, which represents this eightfold path, and we can see here it's written for us right samadhi, so that's like concentration really. It's a Sanskrit word for meditate, to focus, to concentrate. The right view, the right resolve, the right speech, right conduct, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness. So all of these combined are basically this kind of leading an existence in which you're not creating any ripples in the pond. You're not reacting to things, and you're not creating reactions in other people. And in a sense, going with the flow. So this is an eightfold path, which does actually happen as you go through this process of first being aware, the awareness of our mind, our actions, our thoughts, our speech, having that awareness. And once we have the awareness, we begin to notice other things, and things become apparent. We start to see and understand how we are influenced, how our thoughts are influenced and affected by the things that happen to us or the things we do. So this eightfold path is a natural process of development once someone takes that step onto the path of first observing and becoming aware, and then it naturally follows on this eightfold path if we continue with this focus and awareness. So the ultimate goal is enlightenment. It's a very beautiful thing, because then we are at one, as it were, with ourselves, everything going on within us, and the earth and the universe around us. We are disconnected from the craziness. We are more connected to the reality, like something bobbing along on the waves. It just, it doesn't matter how violent or gentle the waves are. You're the cork just bobbing up and down with the waves. There is no effort in being a cork and floating along with the waves. So it's a very positive thing, isn't it? It's a very it's kind of some guidelines that ultimately end up in a pleasant situation for all concerned. And if everyone was doing this, then we would have a lot more peace in the world. We wouldn't be so distracted with all the material things that surround us. However, there's also an awareness and an acceptance that all this other craziness does go on. And this would then come to Hinduism, where we have many gods, Brahma being the main god or creator, who has no real form or gender or anything like that, but Brahma is known as the creator. And then you have other gods such as Vishnu, the preserver, Shiva, the destroyer, And then you met many other ones, Ganapati, the remover of obstacles. And so these gods are not necessarily gods to be worshipped and in the same way that we might worship in a religion such as Christianity, but there's an understanding that these are forms which represent all the diverse nature of how things can how there is creation and eventually things become destroyed and there is rebirth. So it is very cyclical in this respect, and in amongst all of this is a huge amount of diversity. So the gods we see in Hinduism more or less represent that diversity, and so they would appear or symbolize different aspects of human nature and nature in general. And Zen and other religions like this are also on that uh, same level of acceptance of the diversity, the yin yang, the coming and going, the birth, growth, death, rebirth. And again, in Hinduism, I suppose the idea of the Brahma is that he or she will send out these other entities, Vishnu to preserve things or Shiva to destroy things, and because this is just a depiction of the universe resetting itself, cleansing up the mess and starting again, and very much what we see going on in the world around us in nature. So these are more like illustrations of the diversity of life, and of course there is great acceptance among these different guises of the Hindu religion that life is very diverse, and so there won't necessarily ever be a utopia of peace. It has to be that there is birth, growth, destruction, and it's cyclical. Yeah, so again, it's more of a representation of what's going on, all these different gods. So then I was going to start with Christianity, but we'll go back to that now. Because what is the imagery we're given? We're given this image of suffering, pain. We're often made to feel guilty that someone has died for our sins, and we are even born into sin. Like any other religion, all of these things are down to interpretation, and of course ultimately a good Christian is usually a nice person, but we know many, I'm sure we know examples of many people that are very zealous about that, and then they end up lacking certain compassion. So here we start to get into this attachment to beliefs that one might have, and how this rigid way of thinking becomes very, what's the word I'm looking for? Militant rather than and oppressive. Now again, I'm not saying that Christianity does this. I'm saying, or that Christians do this. Of course, there's an understanding that we're all different people, and we all might be born into or choose a particular religion for various reasons, and the religious symbology might mean something totally different. But the point here is that what we see here, compared to something like Buddhism, is this suffering. It's a horrific image that we are given of this man dying on the cross and dying for our sins. So if we now look at the symbol for Islam, this is the crescent moon with a star, and the crescent moon really symbolizes Ramadan, or Ramadan, however you'd like to pronounce it. This is the period of fasting, and this period begins every year, goes on for about a month, at a time when the moon is at a specific phase. So the date of the beginning of Ramadan changes every year, and it will depend on an announcement from the central Islamic imams, because they've looked up and seen that the moon is at a certain phase, and then the fasting begins. So of course the fasting is this is a time for reflection. This is a time for detachment from the material world, from consuming, and it is also a time for being with the family and reflection. And so this is a time to be celebrated, where we are being, we're kind of forcing ourselves into that situation where we reflect and take time out to do so. Now, of course, there are many kind of strict rules that come with it, and some of them might seem illogical and unfair. And like any rule, just like the rules we are being given by the government right now about how we should protect ourselves and other people from the threat of COVID, then there are some some rules that one rule doesn't fit all, one size doesn't fit all. Every situation is different, and so we should at least be able to find the power within ourselves to use that discernment as to whether we should or shouldn't follow certain guidelines, and what those guidelines are really for. It still comes down to personal choice, so you're not going to get beaten up if you maybe have a drink of water because you need to during Ramadan or before sunset. It's not a major sin, but it's good if you can put yourself through that. There's no doubt that fasting is a good thing, and suffering ultimately can be a good thing if we reflect on the suffering. But it's certainly not as daunting as looking at Christ dying on a cross when we think about that. All the clothing and things like that come with Islam. Really, all this comes down to is a general aim to preserve the way things were in the time of Muhammad and his teachings. So the idea is to dress as Muhammad did in those days. Very kind of basic. Of course, it was for a relatively warm climate, and you can argue all day about styles of dress, but that's why Muslims dress in a very similar way, because they are basically trying to adhere to the principles that were taught by Muhammad, and by dressing in that way, that's a kind of constant reminder and a sign of respect. This is my understanding from talking to Muslim friends, and my own experiences, I could be way off the mark, and I'm sure many people will have their own beliefs that they would like to comment on, and you're welcome to do so. So those are the kind of basic religions, and of course, all the ones that we're obviously, very mass religions. So essentially, what I'm talking about here is there is often a rigid conformity by those who wish to follow a particular religion, but that can either develop to its full potential during a lifetime, or it might end up stagnating us. And so if we're following an eightfold path, or if we're following certain principles in a religion, regardless of what it is, whether it's Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, if we are recognizing certain aspects of life and our place on the earth or in the universe, and again, this awareness, as long as we are aware, then we can tailor this to our own needs, and we can leave others to pay respects to their gods, because that's what makes things all right for them. So then we also have heliocentrism that we have come across as being a belief. And this is a weird one, because we are presented with this religious symbol of a globe, which of course we would be led to believe is something that truly exists, unlike an unseen God or scripture. We have this notion that the globe is a scientific fact, but when you look at it and you look at the rhetoric and the beliefs surrounding heliocentrism, you realize that it is a religion just like all the others. And in this respect, also atheism becomes a religion, or becomes a belief, because there is this refusal to acknowledge that there could be some kind of entity, energy, hidden hand, reason for anything to exist. It's all just an accident. There's nothing beyond what we see and experience. So heliocentrism and atheism kind of tie in a lot in that respect, because with heliocentrism we have this idea that it was a big bang for, okay, you could become philosophical about what created the Big Bang. And again, we are faced with this situation where we really don't know. We have no way of knowing or measuring or really, we just don't know. But we can have this story which leads up to this idea that we live on a spinning globe because of heliocentrism that's been introduced, much like any other religion. Of course, as I said, it would appear that this is scientific fact, and this is why many who believe that we live on a globe believe that their belief has a foundation in science. But then this is why it gets called Scientism, because there is a distinct difference between science, or for example the physics or biology or chemistry, in which we can do things, create experiments, make measurements, and we know we'll get certain reactions. These are all things that we can call science, but heliocentrism is based on a huge number of assumptions, and it really is more about the religion of keeping time with a solar calendar, and this has become a belief that we now follow rigidly. The entire world goes by this heliocentric calendar, which is of course the Gregorian calendar. So if you just look back at history, the Gregorian calendar and the heliocentric model were introduced at about the same time, and this would have brought about a huge paradigm shift. And it's around the same time that printing became more prolific. So we have this belief of, or a following of a solar heliocentric Gregorian calendar. And so we have this imagery of the solar system, and of course a globe Earth spinning around the sun as the same as any other religious symbol. We are very, very familiar with this solar system imagery, that there we are on a globe that's spinning around the sun with other planets. This is the imagery you are given. We are taught it from an early age at school. It's one of the first things we see. We see the globe in the classroom, and I'm sure all of us have taken part in creating planets that we might hang from the ceiling or stick on rods or something like that. And of course, ultimately we tell the time with this globe. So the thing is, it's very, very simple. If you want to put the sun at the center of your calendar, then the Earth has to be a rotating globe in order to justify night and day. A globe is the only way, a spinning globe orbiting the sun is the only way you can explain away or illustrate this transition of day and night, if you are to have the sun at the center of your timekeeping mechanism or model, the Gregorian calendar. And of course, all of these religions that we've talked about, of course Islam especially, is using the moon, or at least in the Far East, in Asia, there is still the dominance of the lunar calendar. A lot of festivities and events happen around the lunar calendar, and as we just went through, Islam and the fasting period of Ramadan is connected to the lunar phases. But this does not mean that there is an attempt to explain or illustrate where the Earth is in relation to the moon, or the moon and the sun and the Earth's relationship. There is of course this deep understanding and ability to predict the sun and the moon doing their thing throughout the year. So in many senses this becomes a religious format, because it's habitual. So the sun religiously sets and rises at certain places and times throughout the year, and so does the moon. So we have this religious ceremony going on with the cyclical nature of the sun, moon and stars that we see. And it is entirely open to interpretation. We can, for example, see on the kind of Hindu level there that there is this acceptance that the universe comes and goes. There is this birth, death, and there is a kind of very cyclical nature to it in the meantime, and that's about it. So all of these religions, or the scholars and the priests in these religions, have had a focus on astronomy and astrology as well, uh, because it's the one thing that we can see and experience as happening. This movement, this cyclical nature. It gives us time, but the way we interpret that is entirely up to us. And of course, navigation is made possible with being able to measure time. And then it turns out that we've got, we then illustrate the passage of time with a circle, 360 degrees, divided up into seconds and minutes. Then we have the mathematics, which can be used to convert and manipulate these ideas and illustrations, and so then the mathematics becomes a religion, and then we get this ability to make predictions. You have the ability to make calculations and assimilate those calculations with measurements, but it's important not to, this is where a lot of the confusion comes in, where observations are made, calculations can be made, and they are assumed to be to indicate certain measurements which are unquestionable. But ultimately, the point here is that the globe is a symbol of this heliocentrism religion, where mathematics has been used as the kind of justification. However, you look at this pragmatically, and even a mathematician should be aware and admit that it's still a matter of interpretation. Mathematics can be used to make all manner of interpretations, just as we can illustrate the various Hindu gods in many different ways with a paintbrush. All these things can be described mathematically, if you like, and then they would appear to be true in the minds of a mathematician, because they can then create their own illustrations. So there is, if you look into flat Earth, I feel that it's part of a process of discovery. This path that any one of us might be on, and it's one of those discoveries that we make along the way, that we realize that we have had a certain interpretation of the observations that are made around us, and that has been given to us and just like any other religion. And but we have to go back to this understanding that once we have an awareness of that, of being influenced by a religion or a belief, then it's important to remain detached and not sink into another belief or a replacement. Yeah, so that can easily happen, and it happens with the flat Earth as well. This could be considered the religious symbol of flat Earth. It's what many of us were presented with, or any of you watching might well be given the impression is a representation of the Earth. But really this is nothing more than a projection that goes beyond the usual projection that we see for the globe. And what we have is this belief in an ice wall, and we end up seeing incidences of people swapping their globe belief for this one, a belief in this imagery, and this is misleading. It doesn't represent it represents the mathematics that is used in the globe or the heliocentric belief, and so it's in a way it's a branch of that. It doesn't prove anything, and it certainly doesn't represent reality either. So this is kind of the point I wanted to get to overall, is that for any one of us investigating this and on our own path of self-discovery and awareness, then it is important to be aware that we could easily end up falling into a belief and becoming just as zealotous as people who preach other religions become. And it still doesn't answer the questions that we set out to have answers to when it comes to asking the how and the why. We certainly get this realization that there is a creator or creation going on. I don't get me wrong, as in thinking that there is an all-seeing, omnipotent God as a creator. It would appear to me that each of us and each living thing is the universe, is the Brahma, if you like, experiencing creation through life in all its different forms. And maybe you ultimately get to some kind of realization or acceptance that that is just the way it is, and we are having an experience as part of a larger entity. And we can make analogies on all kinds of levels. You can look at ants or something, and you can see that you've got individual ants making up a colony. They work and behave as individuals. They each have different jobs, but they are still operating as a colony. That's just one example of how we can observe things going on and in and around us, and kind of be aware, make those observations, and then make something of it. Have some realizations as to our place. Everything's just doing what it's doing, and so whatever we end up doing is just, maybe it's just part of the experience. Whether or not we end up reflecting on that in an afterlife, who knows? Huge mystery. But what we also have, if we go back to this image, is fear. When we have a certain belief, we very much fear having that taken away from us. We fear this vacuum, and we're almost made to feel guilty if we question it. And we are seeing it come up in things like Black Lives Matter now. We've got this, the guilt complex is being exploited. uh, and a finger of blame is being pointed, whether it's at other people or even at ourselves. This is not productive. Awareness is productive, of course. Having awareness and then being that change, or having that detachment is an answer, is a solution to those problems. But yeah, what we see going on is beliefs and actions and reactions based on beliefs. All because we are asking the same question and not getting any real coherent answer. It's frustrating. It's a form of suffering in itself. And perhaps the ultimate goal there on an eightfold path is the ultimate relinquishment of, or relinquishing of this desire to have answers. And it's funny because you end up doing a full cycle. You might go from being from not caring about any religion, not caring about the globe or the flat earth or any of that, just not caring. Doesn't affect you, makes no difference. But then there might come a point where we step onto that path of looking and discovering and hunting for some of those answers, and we go along that path, and yes, we do end up coming back to a similar place to where we started, but it is a whole with a whole different aspect and a whole different, and maybe less of an attachment or to the ignorance. You see what I mean? Again, going back to the dog scenario I was talking about, the dog realizes that it is become entangled in a leash, realizes it can't escape, and at some point realizes that it doesn't have the intelligence or the ability to do it itself, and has to surrender, and might find a way to chew through the cord eventually, or through luck, or just from not struggling ends up becoming free. Yeah. So the dog goes from this surrendering to its current situation of being all tangled up in this mess, eventually being released, whether it's by simply not fighting it or waiting for the right moment to be released or relinquished from that suffering at that time of being entangled, and then it's over and done with. It's made a cycle. You can also make a similar analogy to, for example, the horse whisperer story, where the idea is to tame a wild horse, and eventually you put the horse through its worst fears, and that is to be lying on the ground and have someone on top of them, and the horse is maybe put through this process, and eventually that horse is brought to the realization that it isn't so bad to have someone riding them or on top of them. Again, whether you agree or disagree that that's right or wrong, that's not the point. The point is that, as we discussed with the fasting, with Islam, or whatever it is, there's a point. We have to push our boundaries. We have to put ourselves through a certain amount of suffering in order to come out of that suffering and not suffer anymore unwittingly or through ignorance. So I see many who will fight to remain ignorant while feeling some sense of superiority. This is often, in my experience as someone who's making flat earth videos, is people who are good at maths, and so they are able to manipulate figures and numbers, and they can see them, and they can imagineer certain scenarios, and there's this kind of smugness that comes with that, and perhaps they believe that they are dealing with someone who doesn't use the same language, the mathematical language, as them, and thus they maintain some superiority. And it's, you know, when I see these kinds of reactions, yeah, I get angry, because but I also feel sorry for that person, because they try desperately hard not to see it from someone else's point of view. As I said right at the start, you know, flat earth is a realization, is one discovery on this journey. It's not the be all and end all of this journey. It's not the destination. But we end up in confrontations or arguments with those who wish to defend their belief in the globe, and they will give us explanations that are essentially just another form of scripture for this religious story of the Big Bang, mass attracting mass, and all these other things, all these explanations that go with the observations that have been made over the years. And it's a shame. It's a real shame that the discourse ends there often. You reach an impasse, you reach a brick wall, because you're often dealing with someone who is desperate to cling on to their belief and has a rigid belief in that belief, and doesn't even see that it is a religious belief, because they are under the impression that they have a faith in science or the numbers, and this will give them a kind of superiority complex. And personally, when I'm making a flat earth video that's trying to explain or illustrate how to realize that perspective has been converted into this imaginary curve, and how the numbers can be manipulated, you reach this dead end where those who wish to defend their belief in the globe will not engage in constructive discourse. And we see, the funny thing is that we see these behaviors that we once might have had before beginning or taking those steps on the path towards awareness, and you know, this attempting to make progress from becoming aware and having a bit more presence. So it's a shame, because from my point of view, when I'm doing these videos, it's not about trying to convert someone to another religion or another way of thinking. It is trying to find a way to get someone else to see it from another point of view, to to understand, to give that awareness to someone else, what the process or the way of thinking or the way you have to look at something, or all of these stories that we are given for any religion or any belief, no matter what it is trying to impart a skill, if you like, that would help become more aware of when one is defending a belief. And it's just that, you find that the beliefs or the religions such as Buddhism or Hinduism and many other kind of religions that attempt to symbolize what we see going on in the world around us. They are all very open. They're not demanding that you behave a certain way. They're more accepting that we will experience all these different behaviors, all these different actions and reactions in this very diverse universe. And so you get hardliners in any religion, and they can be, people can be converted to believe all sorts of things and commit all sorts of atrocities in the name of religion. So ultimately, the idea is not to attach any labels to who we are. And that becomes very difficult, because then you have to abandon all sense of language or description, and that would include mathematical descriptions as well. So we can. It's easy enough to describe what we see, what we see going on in the world around us, but it doesn't mean we derive any further meaning from it than that. And we just have to be aware how there are many ways of describing something or illustrating, and mathematics is ultimately a description. It simply describes what we see going on. It has no other meaning beyond that, but it can be, of course, interpreted in many different ways. So when I come across these people arguing or defending the globe, or the anti-flat Earth videos, it doesn't make me angry. I feel sorry for those people who you can try and engage with to a certain point, but there always becomes a point where there's a brick wall, and that they are performing mental gymnastics in order to avoid accepting a certain point that or something that's maybe used as evidence or a proof, and eventually you must accept that there are no real proofs. There's still a lot to discover, a lot to learn. So I'll leave it at that, and hopefully this has been an enjoyable journey and food for thought. Thank you very much.
Click subscribe and the bell icon if you'd like to receive notifications of new videos from Phuket Word.